The Brandon Peters Show may contain explicit language and detailed plot points. For more information on the show, stay tuned to the end of the episode. And now, here's Brandon.
Welcome to the Brandon Peters Show and the summer of 82 at 40.
The summer of 82 at 40.
Weekend by weekend look at the movies released during the summer of that year. As always, along for this journey from Forbes and living in 1982 himself, he was there, Scott Mendelson.
Hello. In 1982, I was not quite breathing on my own, but getting there. I was born in April of 1980s for my first 10 weeks premature, spent my first year in the hospital, and then was in and out of the hospital for the second year. I'm okay now. I mean, I'm a little hard of hearing, and I can't, I run out of breath pretty quickly, but other than that, I'm doing okay.
Wow, that's more tragic than one of our movies here.
And a happy ending, though.
Yes. This episode will be looking at June 18 through 20 of the show in a what is going to be a who's going to take down E.T. from here on out.
Spoiler, not much.
Not much. So who will be number 2 for the rest of the summer? That's what we'll look at and we'll do. But first, as always, the news of the moment.
It's the news of the moment.
Looking back at here, on June 14th, Argentina surrenders to Great Britain, ending a 74-day Falklands Islands conflict. On June 15th of this week, Supreme Court rules all children, regardless of citizenship, are entitled to a public education. 1982.
Oh, God.
Not that long ago, really.
I'm horrified to ask how that case came about. But
I don't know, but wow. See, like when we think of things like, women voting and civil rights, it's not really in the grand scheme of things. Hadn't been that long. That's why people still are angry. It's still not perfect. It has not been that long.
No.
Oh, history of the world. June 17th, U.S. President Ronald Reagan's first UN General Assembly address. We must serve mankind through genuine disarmament.
Delicious.
June 18th, ABC's All Talk radio network expands to 22 stations. I'm sure that's thriving today. On June 18th, also, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 extended by the Senate in an 85-8 vote.
Back in my day, the Voting Rights Act was a bipartisan issue, and whenever it came up for renewal, it was almost unanimously approved in the Senate and House, no matter the political party.
Oh, I'd like to see the gerrymandering of those districts back in 1982 as well. That's probably a good map to look at. On June 19th, the body of God's banker, Roberto Calvi, is found hanging beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London. Ugh. Not all news is good news, as we found.
I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
Remind me to Google that later. That's interesting. God's baker?
Yeah, God's baker. June 20th, the U.S. Open men's golf, Pebble Beach. Tom Watson wins his only U.S. Open by 2 strokes from Jack Nicklaus.
The other, no, not Nicklaus. Yeah,
we're talking movies, but this is the golfer. And
I've made that mistake too in my day. Don't worry.
On June 20th, Pete Rose is the 5th player to appear in 3,000 games, joining Cobb, Musial, Aaron, and Yaz. Marjorie Bennett and Kurt Jurgens, the villain from The Spy Who Loved Me, they passed away this week in 1982. We have 2 birthdays, one actor, Missy Peregrine, and the beloved, the amazing, the wonderful Jodie Whittaker, the first female Doctor of Doctor Who, star of Attack the Block. She Broadchurch, amazing woman. She turned 40. She turned 40. Turns 40 this week, but she was born this day in June of 1982.
How old is that in Doctor Who years?
Oh, the Doctor's well over 900.
Fair enough. That is a pop culture property that I have I'm aware of it. I know Karen Gillan became a star.
I kind of like it a little bit. Yeah, Karen Gillan comes from
it's
there.
It's only 50 years worth of thing. I can catch up, right?
60.
Oh,
Scott.
God.
Next year is the 60th.
More or less episodes than Sesame Street.
Oh, gee. Well, there was it was about an 18-year break in there.
So, there you go.
In the middle where we got that TV movie on Fox that did not lead to a series. So but yeah, but that was the news of the moment for this week. Moving on to our first movie is Author.
We had breakfast, we're washing dishes, we're bagging garbage. We're surviving, right?
Not me. Yeah, we're doing beautifully. You want to take a whack at cleaning the oatmeal out of this, or should I just buy another for tomorrow?
Anyone can be a father, but not every father deserves a standing ovation.
He's definitely one of us, as much as a grown-up can be.
Al Pacino and the kids in Author, rated PG. Starts Friday at a selected theater near you.
Has exclamation points, and it does repeat the author. Directed by Arthur Hiller, the director of Love Story, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, The Babe, Silver Streak, Man of La Mancha. Written by Israel Horovitz, starring Al Pacino, Diane Cannon, Tuesday Weld, Bob Dishy, Ari Myers, and Richard Belzer. While facing the stress of his play being produced on Broadway, a playwright deals with having to raise his son, his stepdaughters, and his stepsons. So, Scott, tell us about this piece of Kramer versus Kramer exploitation.
You took the joke right out of my mouth.
This is a real thing. There was a good chunk in this area of knockoffs of Kramer versus Kramer. Like that was like, oh shit, we need to make these divorce pictures.
Well, I would imagine. I mean, the first Kramer versus Kramer won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1970 or 1980. It was 1979. I believe Meryl Streep won her first Oscar as Best Supporting Actress. She would then win Best Actress for Sophie's Choice, and then inexplicably win Best Actress for The Iron Lady in 2011. But that's another grouchy conversation.
Now, prior to Kramer versus Kramer, what was like? Was the big divorce movie The Parent Trap before that? And they got back together at the end.
Default. And they got back on a train for kids.
Yes.
But no, you're absolutely right. The movie Kramer versus Kramer made like 109 million domestic in 1979, which is like 400 million adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
It's sort of used as sort of the go-to example of the kind of film that people actually showed up for back in the day. And yeah, to a certain extent, this subgenre it kind of falls in the trap of lionizing men for doing the kind of emotional and physical labor that women do as a matter of course. This film does fall in that trap a little bit. I don't think it's as grandiose about it as some of the others. I think it's mostly a very small scale, low key character study. It's somewhat autobiographical. The writer Israel Horovitz, based on his own life to a certain extent, and I think that gives it a certain gravity and in eschewing of melodrama, at least to the very end, I would say that works. And I think the picture, whether it succeeds or not, I think it makes an effort to try not to villainize the wife that leaves.
But it does.
It does, but I think. But I also think, to a certain extent, if I may spoil the ending, his moment of realization comes when he realizes that he doesn't need her to be happy, and she deserves to be happy on her own. Yada yada yada. So he doesn't need to have a stereotypical family unit to be a real family. And I don't know how progressive that was in 1979, but I imagine, it's certainly, this was before the quote unquote divorce generation of the Reagan era. But no, I mean, well, this was right around. I'm sorry, I was thinking 1979. Sorry,
we are officially in the Reagan era, sir.
Yes. I don't think it's an exceptional picture. It looks lovely. It's great fun to watch Pacino just play a guy, even though if he's a somewhat successful playwright, he still has a certain blue collar sensibility. And actually, and I know you did too. And when people listen to this, 3 months from now, this is being recorded during the week that The Godfather was re-released into Dolby Cinemas for a week for the 50th anniversary. And I did drag my 14-year-old to see it on Tuesday. It was a 4 o'clock show.
I took my 10-year-old.
What do you think of it, if I may ask?
He was actually, I could tell it's like nothing he'd watched before.
Yeah.
And I warned him of that. I'm like, you haven't seen movies like this, but if you get a chance to see The Godfather in the theater, I'm not going to take that from you. I was going to show this movie to you in a couple of years, but but he was really into the family dynamics of things and character motivations and stuff. But I could tell he was getting slightly restless at times and then slightly into it at times. But he made it through without complaining and talked about, and he's like, how did they make another one of these? Everybody got killed. And I was like, well, when the 4K set arrives at our house, if you want to go on, we can go on. But
well, you might want to show him Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again first. He'll understand the structure of The Godfather Part 2.
Yes.
No, Allie, I think she appreciated it more than enjoyed it. And to be fair, especially when viewed through a modern lens, there are portions that can be sped up if need be. I think the film takes its time explaining stuff in terms of mob culture, or at least mob movie tropes that are now taken for granted and are no longer mesmerizing and surprising and, a peek inside a unique world you've never seen before.
Right.
Because this was one of the first films, at least on that scale, that was about the mafia from inside the mafia. It wasn't just about a bunch of G-men trying to catch mobsters.
And it was grounded, but
it was.
They weren't like, hey, come over here, see?
Rewatching it for the first time in a while, I was surprised by how not violent it is. I mean, other than the nudity, I know they almost got a PG, and I can kind of see why.
Well, when it wants to make it count, it does. I mean, Mo Green's death is like graphic. The opening mass, there are gore highlights, as you would say, if this were a slasher film, but it certainly, I would think, evolves within the realm of, if need be, a 70s PG. Yeah. Nope, it could definitely.
And so, I told her if she wants, a mob movie that's a bit more rock and roll, we can watch Goodfellas at some point.
Right.
But no, I'm glad I did it. It was fine. I almost wish we had watched it at home just because I forgot how hard Marlon Brando is to understand. And I still maintain that is epic Oscar category fraud. That he absolutely should have been in Best Supporting Actor, and Al Pacino should have been Best Actor. But oh well. Anyway, point being, this film was literally 10 years after The Godfather.
Yeah.
And the 80s were not kind to Pacino. He was struggling. Just because I think, not unlike what we see today, Pacino wasn't the kind of person that you would see in a Back to the Future or a Ghostbusters.
Oh yeah,
Indiana Jones, the kind of films that were popular in the aftermath of Star Wars and Jaws. And you were in a situation, this was post Heaven's Gate, where there was starting to be some struggles with the adult skewing drama as a theatrical driver. If to whatever extent Hollywood made all those altruistic, cool, grounded, street level dramas or whatever to appeal to the kids in the 70s, well, the kids in the 80s wanted, Back to the Future. And obviously we have very similar situations now, but
well, he went the way of like the directors of those 70s, not all of them survived. And he went the way of like a, not to as extreme degrees, but like a Cimino or Friedkin, where it started to fizzle away, but he managed to De Palma it and make it through. Spielberg even didn't have it good in the 80s.
Yeah, he would, and we talked about that, I think, during the ET podcast.
Mhm.
But with Pacino, and to be fair, the movies weren't all that great. I mean, we're talking about
Right.
Cruising, Revolution, Author. I think Carface is massively overrated. It's entertaining,
Mhm.
but it also was a huge flop. I mean,
Yeah.
it was not a hit when it first came out. So it really wasn't until Sea of Love in 1989, which was sort of basically it was a very high concept, glossy, adult skewing erotic thriller
Right.
before Basic Instinct and right after Fatal Attraction.
Yeah.
And then he would follow that up with The Godfather Part 3 and Dick Tracy. And then he was just old enough
Carlito's
to sort of
Way and
Carlito's Way. And that was when he was becoming old enough to be sort of a bankable character actor.
Right.
Where he could be a leading man for a prestigious picture, or he could be a supporting character in something somewhat, devil's advocate-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Which I adore that film. That's, neither here nor there. Same thing with Scorsese. I mean, I love After Hours, but the 80s were not kind to him.
I mean, De Niro had like Midnight Run and stuff, but it's not like he was the type of actor you'd throw in Back to the Future and comic book films like Joker was like the perfect fit for a De Niro. Like that's where he could fit. But
and I think to a certain extent, the resurgence of indie cinema also triggered in the 90s, triggered a resurgence of indie sensibility. So you had, to a limited extent, an audience for De Niro, Pacino, Scorsese.
Keitel, Travolta comes back.
Yes. Yeah, that might be why Travolta came back. Because I mean, it's, and even the Stallone that made Victory and Paradise Alley, briefly shows up again in Copland toward the end of the 90s. But anyway, I'm getting way off the reservation here. But no, it's not great. I can see why it didn't get great reviews in the 1980s. I struggle not to grade it on too much of a curve, just on the whole. It's a real movie with character, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Now we used to take for granted.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
I think it's a movie that it shifts its interest and isn't sure where it wants to make the movie. Like some of it is really interested in the play, some of it's really interested in the family, and it never mesh. Maybe it's by design to try to get you to feel the stress of Pacino, but as a viewer, you're just kind of like, oh, I'm going this way. There's like an interesting story with him and Diane Cannon and him trying to juggle all this with that, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Drops off. There's stuff with the kids. And I don't think Pacino's good with kids. Like I don't
it's certainly
think
different.
It's maybe I haven't seen him with that before, but I don't believe he has any experience in real life with kids. And it kind of shows, but it kind of works, but it kind of doesn't. And it's a real weird situation where it's like, we want to live with this like man that's been our stepdad for like a year. I don't know how long they've been together, but I don't know. It's a definitely it's the Kramer versus Kramer thing, but something you've not seen before and doesn't get really made even after this.
Yeah, and he even said he made this film specifically because he thought it would be interesting to play a character who's was almost primarily motivated by his relationship with his children. Yeah, you're right. That's not something that. And honestly, the leading men of that era were not quite old enough to be regularly playing husbands and fathers at that point.
Yeah, and it's a New York movie that showed me a part of New York that I don't think I've seen much in movies. It felt like a new piece, a different piece of New York rather than your typical. I mean,
look out, it's Batman.
Right. I mean, there's your Woody Allen New York, there's your Martin Scorsese New Yorks, and they can do the same New York all the time because that's their New York. But there's other filmmakers that do kind of the same spots with New York. This one felt like it was a specific area. And I remember, I remember a line in it was really funny. They dogged Greenwich Village, boring Greenwich Village. I'm like, that was like a happening place in like the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
That was where all the hipster stuff was going on. I personally, I went and saw a live Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight when I was in New York in 2000 in Greenwich Village where they were doing it. So I was like, oh, that was a happening place back then. There was this weird song that bookends the film about milk and cookies, and it was really weird. It's like, what is this? Like, it's like, you remind me of milk and cookies. I was like, no, but that song I guess was up for a Razzie. So odd turn of events. Okay, Razzies. Okay.
How old are the Razzies?
They've been around for a long time. I think they began in the early 80s. There was, I think Xanadu was the film that started them or something like that.
Fair enough.
This movie is not something to seek out. It's not really available. It wasn't even available. I had to rent a DVD from the library, and it's not on any streaming service, not available digital rent or anything, not on Blu-ray. So
I had to find the man that had a copy, go to his house, murder him, and take his copy.
Yes. And it was Betamax.
It was Betamax with Spanish subtitles. And pan and scan.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
But author. Yeah. I was like, oh, it's a Pacino movie. He's usually good, but it was, I've done worse things with my time, I guess. I don't want to dog the movie too much, but I don't think it's that great either.
Well, because most of my, even though, I've seen my share of Pacino films, I tend to think of him in the more extreme character parts that he does, whether it's, Michael Corleone or Serpico, or
right.
the unhinged bank robbery he plays in Dog Day Afternoon. And then, later on, the Devil's Advocate, Dick Tracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That it is fun to see where he's just a guy. Yeah,
it's true. And, but I guess him and Arthur Hiller didn't get along during this movie, but this is a period where Pacino didn't get along with a lot of directors. Friedkin had a lot of trouble with him on Cruising, and Al's an interesting cat when you read about. He has his own, like, if you want to get him to set, you have to tell him 5 hours before where you really want him.
Yeah, I've heard some stories.
And he's very self-conscious about his hair. And but the thing is, he's not a dick. He's really calm about and oblivious about everything. But he's interesting. He's a genius on the screen and pretty good. From what I hear, he's pretty good on stage too. Like, that's the difference between him and De Niro is Pacino can do the stage, De Niro can't. But I've heard some very interesting stories and I've read books and stuff where they talk about how Pacino was in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know if he's still like that, but
I hope not. He's what is it, 80s right now?
Right.
How old is he?
He's pretty old.
But I hope he's sort of mellowed out a little bit.
Author
81. Jeez, he turns 82 in next month.
Dang. 82, celebrating the 82.
That's ironic.
Author, I don't know if it's what a picture type thing.
To many people, you seem to represent man against the system. Do you see it that way?
To some people, I represent a dying individuality that is within our system. But that's, I feel there is a crying out for individuality. I feel that because of the intellect of the human race, we bogged ourselves down in such bureaucratic nonsense that it seems like we've made life much more complicated than it should be.
All right. We'll go to our TV show, Top 10 TV from the Nielsen Ratings for this week in 1982. Number one, Scott, a Barbara Walters special on ABC. Yeah, those were a big deal. Those were a huge deal back in the day. Barbara Walters.
They were. I remember the after Oscar special being, with the weepy interviews with celebrities being, must-see TV.
Mm-hmm. And this, now that we get people on social media, no one would care about these Barbara Walters specials. Social media and all this, and bonus features on Blu-rays and stuff, they kind of sent it away. Number two, Too Close for Comfort finishes from ABC. Number 3, Hill Street Blues, or NBC, climbing it up. They have jumped up the charts here. Number 4, Three's Company on ABC. Number 5, Trapper John MD on CBS. Number 6, everyone's favorite MASH on CBS. Also on CBS at number 7, The Jeffersons. At number 8, Give Me a Break on NBC. Number 9, 5 Days Home on NBC, which is a George Papard directed film starring he and Sherry Boucher. So I had to look at it. I was like, what the hell is 5 Days from Home? And that finished in the top 10. It's not a TV movie. It was a theatrical release from 1979 that aired on NBC. So it must have been an of its time popular thing that didn't make it mileage. But George Peppard directed himself. And number 10, Love Boat on ABC. So Love Boat has cracked the top 10 here. So Scott, this Barbara Walters special.
You know what it was on?
Yes, I looked it up. I had to.
Oh, awesome.
This is great. This is the best segue ever.
Satanic Panic?
It was her summer special with Carol Burnett.
Oh.
Willie Nelson.
Oh.
And Clint Eastwood, who is the star
of son of a bitch.
Our next
Speaking
film,
of actors
Firefox.
that struggled in the 80s.
Yes. Our next film, Firefox. I was very happy. I was like, oh, look at that. Firefox.
The plane, Firefox, the most devastating killing machine ever built. The man, Mitchell Gant, U.S. fighter pilot.
Gant, can you fly that plane?
Yeah, I can fly it.
The mission, steal Firefox. Clint Eastwood in one of the most incredible undercover operations in history, Firefox.
Clint Eastwood in Firefox and Caddyshack, the comedy with balls. Starts tomorrow at selected Skyline drive-ins, both rated M.
Clint, he was probably on because this movie was opening, and Carol Burnett, we'll talk later, is in our last movie today, which was opening wide. So these were two planted from studios interviews probably to go with this weekend of release. But yeah, we're on to Firefox. Directed by Clint Eastwood, written by Alex Lasker, who did only like 6 films, and the other notable one was like way later, Tears of the Sun. Wendell Wellman also wrote it, and he would act in Sudden Impact. Didn't write anything else. Based on a Craig Thomas novel starring Clint Eastwood, Freddie Jones, Kenneth Connolly, and David Hoffman. It's about a pilot who's sent into the Soviet Union on a mission to steal a prototype jet fighter that can be partially controlled by a Neuralink. This movie answers the trivia question for me. What else has Captain Piet been in?
Explain.
Captain Piet from Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, the guy who rises in the ranks through Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, fair enough.
I have an action figure of Captain Piet.
I hope that's still in mint condition in the box.
It is. It is.
Oh,
I got it when
college fund paid for.
When I work, no, it's not worth shit. It's from the 90s. It is from the 90s. I was working at Toys R Us. I was opening a box of Star Wars toys, and I was like, "Oh shit, they made one of him. I'm buying it." So I bought it, Captain Piet.
Good times.
Firefox. This is one of 2 movies from Clint Eastwood this year. Later in December, he would direct and star in Honky Tonk Man. So this is his directorial follow-up to Bronco Billy, not to be confused with Bronco Henry, who's making the rounds this year, and his acting follow-up to Any Which Way You Can,
which was his biggest grossing film ever up until the 90s.
Huge.
Was that was the sequel, right?
Because is the first one Any Which Way You Can But Loose, and then they subtracted words for a sequel?
I think so. I should just look this up while we're talking. But no, Firefox, it is basically pitched as a what if Clint Eastwood but Star Wars to a certain extent, specifically the dogfights in the Star Wars, the first 2 Star Wars films.
But Loose was the first one in 78.
What was that?
But Loose was the first one. They They cut out that for the second one. So yeah. So
and yeah, if I recall off the top of my head, that was his biggest grossing film, at least until Unforgiven.
Yeah. People like monkeys, and then you take
like
the
Clint
biggest
Eastwood with a monkey.
You put the biggest star on the planet with a monkey. There you go.
Exactly. Anyway, it's an interesting picture. I had never seen it before this. I had heard of it. It was just not on my radar. I was surprised at how much of up to a point, it's just a grounded, gritty, suspenseful spy thriller.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll let you do the synopsis because you probably have something written and I don't.
Oh, no, I already read it.
Oh, fair enough. What was I doing? Sorry, I must have been looking up his filmography. But no, it's
for your review. A pilot is sent into the Soviet Union on a mission to steal a prototype jet fighter that can be partially controlled by a Neuralink. So
yeah, and the first 2 acts of the picture runs about 130 minutes. It's basically him being recruited and him being sent into Russia and him sneaking his way around with periodic bursts of violence and almost violence. And it's genuinely tense. And it, at least in my point of view, it's an unusual role in that for most of the film, Clint Eastwood's character is scared shitless.
Yeah.
Understandably. I mean, it does present a bleak picture of, Soviet era Russia. Good things are better now.
Well, he's got some post-traumatic stress from Vietnam.
We really knew what that was. I mean, this is
Rambo. First Blood comes out this year too.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't have made this knowing what First Blood was. They would have been in production around the same time. So it's like Conan the Barbarian and the movie at the end of our summer, Beastmaster, which Beastmaster wasn't a knockoff. It was actually shooting before Conan, actually. So, but Firefox, yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting to see him being vulnerable and afraid of the bad guys and afraid of the people that are out to get him. And that's understandable. And I'm not, it makes him more he spends a large chunk of the film wearing basically bookworm glasses and a Jim Gordon mustache.
Yeah, it's weird to see Eastwood. Eastwood normally would rock a beard.
Yeah,
if he had facial hair, but just straight mustache was interesting.
And then the entire third act of the film is what you came to see, which is spoilers. He steals the plane, and then escapes, and then is chased down by at least a couple other Russian fighter pilots that would prefer he not escape with that plane.
Right.
And the film is violent when it needs to be. It's not particularly grotesque, but it's very blunt about the sacrifices that those less dedicated Russians made to hinder the KGB at certain parts of the war. If you want a really, really good movie about that, I suggest Benedict Cumberbatch's the Courier that came out in 2021.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty cool film. Yeah.
It's on. I think it's for free on Amazon right now.
Yeah, I had to review that one. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it's a solid picture. But anyway, and the closing action scene, as long as it is, I would argue it doesn't generally become that redundant. And I like the fact that even when he's in the sky and fending off other fighters, the Russian government is like, look, this isn't personal. Just bring back the damn plane.
Yeah, we're going to kill you when you do, but
maybe we won't. We certainly won't do it painfully.
Yeah. I personally thought this was a pretty terrific, really good movie until he got on the plane. And then it was like, I don't know. It didn't sink the movie, but it was less interesting for me.
Well, it was more formulaic. I think it's more what you thought you were getting out of a movie from the film synopsis.
Right. Yeah. I did not expect this dark noir spy who came in from the cold, but with a little bit up ante of violence type movie. And I was really enjoying that. And I'm like, oh, he has to steal that plane at some point, doesn't he?
No, you're not wrong. I guess I sort of viewed it as I thought it was pretty solid action from a technical point of view,
and it's pretty
especially
impressive.
back then.
Yeah, no, it's impressive. It is,
and it's sitting through the third act, as formulaic as it is sort of the price that we pay for the really, really strong first 2 acts. And yeah, I am glad I saw it. I'm not going to say you need to race out and see this unless you're a completist for Clint Eastwood 80s pictures and or Cold War melodrama. Again, I think it sort of it further enhances the notion that, contrary to popular belief, most big Hollywood movies about the Cold War were horrifically jingoistic and nationalistic.
Right.
Or, even something like, Rocky IV. The Soviet system may be evil, but the Russian people aren't.
Right. No, exactly. That's what I tell my, tell my son about things too. Just, it's the government officials you don't like. It's not the people that I go, because I remember I was like, because I We talked about like how he was not a fan of like Donald Trump when Donald Trump was president. And I told him, like, don't you think there's probably Russian kids like you and adults that aren't fans of Putin as well? And he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm like, yeah, they would be harmed in any kind of big bomb explosion or attack that you would do. So
yeah. And yeah, there are some 80s pictures that I think laid it on kind of thick, Red Dawn, for example.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think, just because, I mean, the people that made these films aren't monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think they understand that it's more compelling and it's more engaging and it's more gripping if even the bad guys are human beings.
Right.
Now, the inverse of that is, frankly, I wonder, and I'm getting a little off topic here, so forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder to what extent it has cost us in a pop cultural sense, having at least a decade full of villains that have good and virtuous reasons for being evil and are really sympathetic, versus, we've gone to a point from where, back in my day in the 90s, in the Naked Gun 2.5, which certainly isn't selling itself as a subversive political picture, the bad guys are corporate villains who want to destroy the environment just because.
Mm-hmm.
And now, 20, 30 years later, it's the bad guys are the ones that want to save the environment, but just don't want to do it the wrong way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And I
the
have my
Marvel
issue.
Villain.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think The Rock was sort of the first one that did that. And it was fascinating at that time because I don't say I've never seen that, but it really struck out the extent that Ed Harris's character was a sympathetic person doing a bad thing for a very good reason,
Mm-hmm.
and doing his damnedest not to, commit evil in the pursuit of a, complicated good, a compromised good.
Right.
To the point where he needs to get killed off before the end of the third act, so you can have an action climax.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I have my issues with Tenet, but I kind of appreciated that Kenneth Branagh was just a royal dickhead.
Yeah.
He maybe the people that sent him the stuff from the future have reasons, blah, blah, climate change, blah, blah, blah. But he was just a dick. He was just an asshole.
Some men just want to watch the world burn, Scott.
Pretty much. But anyway, I'm getting off the topic.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting, like, I would say that if you're a fan of like spy drama, spy fantasy, and you're scrolling through like a streaming service, this pops up, give it a shot. Like it's got a lot of the qualities that you're going to be looking for in that. It's Eastwood in a role that you don't, he gets to build himself up to be Eastwood again. Like he starts typical Eastwood and it wind up your Eastwood, but in the middle there, it's some very interesting stuff from him that you don't typically see. And it's that kind of star driven thing. He's like, he has this like this, and like Denzel Washington would make a career on it where like he's the biggest star in this thing, and he usually surrounds himself in movies with people that aren't that up. Once in a while the team up happens, but usually like, because like Denzel would do a movie where he's a detective and like the next notable name is like Dean Cain. Like that's it, and Denzel, made a career. I'm going to be the coolest dude in the room. Sorry. Yeah. And then we'll fill it out. But actually it gets other people that you don't see often parts. So that's also interesting too. And
I know which Denzel Washington movie you're talking about.
Out of sight.
Which is awesome.
Or out of time. Yeah.
Out of time. Yeah. And the irony is, I mean, to a certain extent, when Clint Eastwood teamed up with somebody else, the grosses tended not to reflect that. Because he made a film with, I think, Burt Reynolds.
It was the biggest thing in the world, and nobody went and saw it.
Yeah.
It bombed.
I could be mistaken, but yeah, it only made 38 million on a 25 budget.
There were two Titans at the time. That was that was a huge deal. Those two.
And he had he wasn't as tough as Pacino in the 80s, but he had some ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
Sudden Impact was the most impactful Dirty Harry sequel.
Right.
That's the one from where Go Ahead, Make My Day. When people think of the Dirty Harry series, that's usually the one they think of.
Right.
Even though I think the Deadpool is the best of the five, or at least the most enjoyable.
It's fun. It's a good popcorn flick. I think I really like. I've grown into liking Magnum Force a lot because I like that it throws the first one the first one's ideals in its face. Like,
yes, I think they all kind of do. And you're correct. I'm not disagreeing with you. You're absolutely right. But I do think, and I wrote a paper on this in college about how the first 3 Dirty Harry sequels sort of all served as answers to criticisms of the first film.
Mm-hmm.
So you had, strong, empowered female police officers. You had, a black militant who was viewed in the third film, and force was viewed in a positive light. You have a feminist vigilante who righteously kills the men that raped her and her sister. And Harry goes right along with it because, he realizes the difference between, justice and the law or whatever. So in a way, the films were answering certain criticisms about the first film, that the Scorpio was a negative stereotype of hippies, that the film, the scene where he guns down the various black bank robbers had certain racial connotations, although they knew that even when they were making the first film. That's why they added a scene where he visits a doctor who happens to be black, and it's very obvious that they have a long friendly relationship. And then when you get to Deadpool, they're sort of out of things to apologize for. So that one's just more of a romp.
Yeah definitely.
Although oddly enough, that one, which is more of a romp, is the only one where Harry out and out commits murder.
Yeah,
because the other ones he always fires when fires first, tries to make them tries to arrest them, yada yada yada. In this film, not only does he shoot the diner robbers before they even get a chance to surrender, he outright murders the villain at the end. The guy's out of bullets, he throws away his gun, and Harry spears him, shoots him with the spear gun anyway.
Oh yeah, welcome to the jungle.
Indeed.
Yeah. No, I wrote when I was the Mendelson's Memos. I wrote all about that was my second series after James Bond. It was a bit early to do a For Me series after my first one, but I did it because I was like, no one writes about Dirty Harry, and I got a whole lot of shit about dated. So I'm like, it's movies, and the movies are actually point out these things that you don't think they are if you're not watching them. And Eastwood's a bit smarter than that. I don't think he is this gruff, but like ultra conservative person that people think he is all the time. But and he's been he does come down the side of that, but I don't think he's as ultra.
I mean, I don't think it's a end of zero-sum game, but he's never going to live down that stupid chair stunt.
Nope.
I mean, that was so beneath him.
Yeah.
Or at least beneath who we assumed he was, but whatever.
Right. And a guy like him, though, to be honest, he's too fucking busy making movies to really know what's going on in the fight. Like a lot of them, both sides of the coin. Like,
Clooney's got other things to do.
Right. So Firefox, solid and not so if it's on streaming, you see it, like you like Eastwood, you like spy stuff, if you're really into planes.
Just to throw in other Eastwood 80s films that are better than Pink Cadillac, have you ever seen Tightrope?
That was
that may be my favorite 80s picture from him. It's slight synopsis, it's about a homicide cop who's hunting a sexual murderer, a serial killer, before they were really par for the course, and realizing that he shares some kinks with the bad guy.
Yeah.
And for his time, it was very groundbreaking, the idea that it wasn't super judgmental about, unconventional sexual fetishes. It does, however, feature a really meta creepy scene where his own teenage daughter is kidnapped, bound, and gagged at his house. I mean, played by his own daughter.
Right.
It's like, that's just weird.
Yeah. Look what he does to Sandra Locke in all his movies too. It's funny because
she's been raped in like 4 of his movies, I think.
Right. Because he's one of the first people when I was in high school and studying movies. He was one of the first icons, first directors that I picked up on the filmography and was going through. But yeah, Tightrope's a pretty cool one. Yeah, definitely.
Now let's answer our trivia question. It comes to us from Daryl Erdman of New Richland, Minnesota, who watches the show on Channel 10 in Rochester. He wants to know what single held the same position within the top 10, aside from number 1, for the longest period of time. Well, that record was set just a few months ago when a four-man group kept a song at the number 2 position for an amazing 10 consecutive weeks. It was a group whose members come from both England and America, and this group is used to spending long periods of time at that same position in the top 10. You see, last year they spent 4 weeks at number 4 with their song called Urgent, and it wasn't long after that that the group Foreigner spent a record-breaking 10 weeks at number 2 with their song Waiting for a Girl Like You. And there's your answer, Daryl. Waiting for a Girl Like You by Foreigner has spent more weeks at one position in the top 10, excluding number 1, than any other song. And it never did reach number 1. Thanks for writing in.
So we'll move on down to the Casey Kasem top 40, the top 10 of the top 40, of course. We got some stagnant stuff, some movers, some shakers. Number 10, It's Gonna Take a Miracle by Denise Williams. That drops in on the top 10 for the first time. It Hurts So Good stays is here from John Cougar. This is when he dumped the Mellencamp. John Cougar. Let It Whip by the Daz Band. Crimson and Clover by Joe Jett and the Blackhearts. Heat of the Moment by Asia stays put at number 6. Always on My Mind by Willie Nelson also stays put at number 5. The Other Woman, Ray Parker Jr. sticking at 4. Number 3, jumping up from number 7, Rosanna by Toto. Jumping up one spot to number 2, Don't You Want Me by the Human League. And continuing its dominance like it's E.T. or something, Ebony and Ivory by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. So E.T. number 1 in the box office, which is going to keep happening, and we are still here. But maybe Don't You Want Me by the Human League will hop. It's been climbing. Maybe. And you know what? Rosanna from Toto, made a big jump. So maybe. It's Casey Kasem. Casey Kasem would say, maybe. Or by request. I always loved it when Casey Kasem, because I listened to the weekly top 40. There's that him, and then there was Rick Dees was another one. But Casey Kasem would always be like, now let's take a time to read a letter. And he'd read this like really heartfelt thing, like, Dear Casey, my dog passed away, and we used to always listen to such and such a song, and da-da-da. So could you please play such and such a song? And he'd be like, Darcy, thank you. No. But instead, we're going to play da-da. Like, you couldn't fucking play that one? She cried her heart out, and you're like, here's a new hit that they paid us money to debut on the show. Like, you know, like, I was like, oh, Casey. Oh. Nobody's favorite Robin, Casey Kasem. Rest in peace, sir. We're good, Scooby. Or Shaggy.
Why any kid would want to be an orphan is beyond me.
Annie's got it all. All the fun. All the power. All the knockouts.
Who's next?
All the music. All the romance.
Wouldn't you like to see the bedroom? That little billiard ball?
All the laughter.
Leaping
All the excitement. It's Annie. And you haven't seen Annie until you've seen the movie. Rated PG.
Can I just do a commercial?
Starts Friday, Avco Westwood, Chinese, Hollywood, and selected theaters.
All right. Speaking of music, let's go on to another musical this summer, the wide release of Annie, which opened back in May. But you remember we decided to hold off for the wide release, which here we are, directed by John Huston.
Yes, that John Huston.
Between directing Victory and Under the Volcano, he'd follow this up with, written by Karol Sobieski, based on the stage play by Martin Charnin, and the book of the stage play by Thomas Meehan. Sobieski, plenty of TV, including Peyton Place, Mod Squad, and she wrote the film Fried Green Tomatoes. It stars Aileen Quinn, Albert Finney, Carol Burnett, Ann Ranking, Tim Curry, Bernadette Peters, and Jeffrey Holder. It is about a spunky young orphan who is taken in by a rich eccentric, much to the chagrin of the cantankerous woman who runs the orphanage. It's our first comic book movie of the summer. We did Conan, but he originates in novels.
Yes.
So,
and off the top of my head, it's probably the third biggest grossing comic book movie behind the first two Superman films.
Oh,
unless I'm missing something, and I might be.
Funny fact about when I was researching this, Steve Martin was supposed to play Rooster, but he and Bernadette Peters were on the breakup at the time, and so he had to leave the role because he's like, this is uncomfortable. Bernadette, no relation to me, Peters. Just saying. I know our voices are exactly alike, like we talk the same, but no relation.
Tim Curry took over. Which certainly is cast a type,
right? I think Curry makes it his own. But yeah, these are the type of roles he gets. Yeah.
This was one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time. Cost something like anywhere, depending on who you ask, $35 to $59 million.
To be fair, it looks it.
That
time,
the
for
money's
a
on the
movie
screen.
That time. Yeah.
It's a big, splashy, over-the-top Hollywood musical based on a source material that everybody, and generally speaking, had heard of and liked, and the idea of getting a big movie out of it was somewhat of an event.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't that big of a hit.
No,
it really wasn't a hit. It was kind of a flop.
Yeah, it
only did 35 million domestic all told. So excuse me, 57 million domestic all told from I believe like a $5 million wide release opening weekend. 5.3 and 1,100 screens. And it had decent legs, but it never really had much momentum after that.
Yeah, its legacy, like its adoration, comes from like home video. If there is, is there a big fondness for this? I mean, we all know.
No, it was the most
didn't
easy.
come from the movie. Like,
it's a situation where if up until a point, if you wanted to watch an Annie, this was the one.
Right.
You could get it at a video store, you could watch it on TV or whatever. And it wasn't so much that people loved Annie, it was that it was a musical you could show your kids.
It was iconic, yeah.
The Cats of its day, sort of.
Right.
Honestly, it's a movie it didn't do much for me. Never has.
I showed it to my daughter. I watched it. My daughter watched it with me. She's since watched it before going to bed a time or two now since she watched it. But yeah, it's long.
Mm-hmm.
It has, some solid. It has a good bounce. Like a good musical should have 3 of them that stick with you. It checks that box.
Yeah.
Of good bouncers. Carol Burnett's great in it. Like,
she is.
This is like sneaky Oscar, like great, but like I don't think anybody paid attention. But it's a long movie. It's I don't know.
I hate to dignify these schmucks, but it actually was a major Razzie contender that year.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Or Alien Quinn, who I think played Annie. That's
yeah.
She won Worst Supporting Actress.
She's the lead.
She's also like 10 years old. Those bastards.
Yeah. Well, she's not bad. She's not bad in it. It's just
no, of course not.
There's just something uninteresting and boring about a lot of how it's played and looks, and it's done. Houston directs it like a 60s musical, and musicals and things have changed since then. So
yeah,
it's not, I mean, like Grease 2 last time, just there's nothing cinematically interesting about just a camera far back watching choreography a lot of the times. I give this over Grease 2 that the songs are better and the filmmaking's better, but like I don't know. There's something Oliver-esque. This is like the female answer to Oliver, basically.
Yes.
And except this would have benefited if this was a 60s film instead of a 1982 film. I think we'd be looking a little bit more fondly on it. But when we see the stuff that's surrounding it, this feels like dated and old and not in a vintage, cute kind of way.
Well, I also think Oliver is just better source material. I don't adore Oliver, the play or the movie, but I think
I'll give
an
Annie
interesting
the song,
case.
Oliver the story.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair. I think it's an interesting example of taking a relatively dark piece of literature and making a kid-friendly adaptation with it while still keeping the spirit of the content.
Right.
In a way, not like Disney's Hunchback cartoon.
Well, I was talking recently, not to switch it over to Oliver, who has an exclamation point.
Yes.
I was talking to Yancey Burns about this recently, like, because we had both recently, because it was in the Columbia Classics Volume 2 collection for 4K, and we'd taken it in, and like Oliver used to be like in a huge piece of the pop culture lexicon that like no one would understand, like the Artful Dodger, like More Please, like everything from Oliver was like in your lingo, and everybody referenced things from Oliver. I think people reference things from Oliver not even knowing it was from Oliver. And there's so much stuff in that movie, and Oliver Reed it's one of his best roles, and I know he's in a ton of Hammer movies, is good, but like, he's fantastic at that. But like, that movie used to be this staple of pop culture, and it's disappeared. Even though they've made other Olivers, that particular one, it won Best Picture, of course.
It did,
but it's disappeared.
Was it the last musical to win Best Picture until Chicago? I think so.
Yeah. Yep. Cabaret didn't take it. Cabaret took plenty of important awards away from The Godfather. Yeah. But deservingly, Cabaret's a fantastic film and changed how we could make musicals.
Yes.
It's a very important movie.
But I do think part of the movie's situation is that there's an entire generation of film scholars that grew up thinking of Oliver as that silly musical that beat 2001.
Yeah. Well, and Oliver also was a musical winning Best Picture at a time when musicals were in the dumps.
Yeah.
Like, nobody was going to them. They were bombs. They were being overdone productions. And Oliver, I think the critic reviews were even not too big on Oliver too, from what I remember.
I don't remember, to be honest.
They were like mixed positive, maybe. They weren't like glowing, I don't think, but maybe they were. But I want to say they weren't like, it was kind of a surprise Best Picture winner a little bit.
That I do recall.
But Annie had no shot, and this should have been a summer hit, but it was expanding theaters. I mean, it started low, and we've tracked that it was making a good percent, like good per theater average up till now. But
I am wrong. Oliver got generally positive reviews right out of the gate.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I had to look it up.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a huge hit. I mean, like 77 domestic on a 10 million budget.
Gotcha.
Anyway.
Well, it's like the nerds where they Oliver beat 2001. Yeah. And Annie Hall beat Star Wars. And you can like both. And
that's Wolves and Goodfellas.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, holy shit. A 3-hour anti-colonialism Western that's violent as hell, starring a guy that was just starting to be a star, makes 424 million worldwide. And you argue, it's not cool because Goodfellas should have won.
Yeah. Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction. The endless debate of my favorite movie.
Tarantino thinks they're both funny, and he's right.
Yes.
Anyway.
But Annie, it's got some neat moments and stuff, but altogether quite long in the tooth. It's kind of steady. Like, Annie has kept going because they've done, like we talked about, Grease before. They did Annie live on TV, and they did another adaptation. I hate to call it a remake because it's adapting from a stage play, so it's another adaptation with the Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz and Rose Byrne one, which I never saw.
It's okay. It
was another Annie doesn't do huge box office.
Yeah, although I mean it did it did more than I expected. It cost a lot. It was an $85 million picture.
The final film of Cameron Diaz?
Might be by default. Yeah.
I think she retired right after that.
Yeah. Did 137 million worldwide, which is a solid number.
That's not bad.
But it cost 65 to make.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a shame because, without getting into old discourse, the film came out right during the Sony hack.
Oh, okay.
And there were a lot of embarrassing emails related to how certain higher ups did or didn't, what they did or didn't think about their black talent. And at the time, I was like, okay, some of this stuff is a little offensive, but they're the ones subsidizing a, Quinzavellahani Wallace starring musical co-starring Jamie Foxx, and AAA from Lost. Other studios aren't doing that. And at the time, I ran the numbers, and at that time, Sony had put out more Black-centric mainstream theatrical releases over the last few years than any other studio.
Gotcha.
Especially if you don't count stuff with The Rock. But I don't think that's the case anymore, just by default. Anyway.
But do you have any memorable favorite songs from Annie, Scott?
No.
Tomorrow, or Hard Knock Life.
They're fine.
They're fine. They stick.
It was never one of my favorites.
Not mine either. But yeah, it was interesting to revisit this, and I remember that for some reason I forgot John Huston directed this, so that came up. I was like, ouch. Oh, all right. From the director of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, star of The Visitor. The guy who slept with his daughter and wanted to fondle his granddaughter in Chinatown brings you Little Orphan Annie. But yeah, so Annie, but you started off on Annie's box office, but let's look at the top 10, Scott, for this week. Wonder what number one is.
Spoiler, it's E.T. again. $12.6 million, rising 6.6% as word of mouth continued to kick ass and take names for Spielberg's critically acclaimed sci-fi blowout. Adding an additional 13 screens for an 1,116 screen total, E.T. the Extraterrestrial earned $11,299 per screen.
Wait, 13 is in like 10 plus 3 is what
yes.
they added? Ooh, expansion.
Yeah, pretty much. It would earn $34.4 million in its first 10 days of release. It would be its second weekend at number one, with many more to come. Clint Eastwood's Firefox opened with a very strong $8.1 million on 881 theaters. The $20 million picture was the most expensive film Eastwood had made up to that point. It would eventually go on to earn $46 million on a 20 budget, which back then was just fine.
Yeah.
Number 3 was Rocky 3, holding on really well, frankly. It dropped 23% in its fourth weekend, remaining on 1,232 screens for a $55 million 24-day total. Star Trek 2 was in fourth place, dropping a bit because, it's a fan-driven project, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, Rocky's holding and Star Trek's falling. That's interesting, yeah.
6.2 million in weekend 4, a 33% drop in 1,508 screens, losing 113 screens for a still perfectly fine $42.117 million 7-day total. Annie, after 4 weekends in 14 theaters, Annie expanded to 1,102 theaters, and nobody showed up. $5.3 million for a miserable $4,820 per screen average. The film would limp to approximately, that's the wrong Annie. Hold on. It would limp to $57 million domestic. Poltergeist did 4.7 in weekend 3, dropping 12% in just 911 theaters. For a $24.3 million 17-day average. Author would open to $2.27 million in 500 theaters. It would eventually gross a whopping total of $13.1 million. Alas. Meanwhile, I apologize. Excuse me.
That's how I felt about Grease 2 as well, Scott.
Well, yeah, Grease 2 drops. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. For a movie in 1982, dropping 51% is a freaking catastrophe. My God. I don't know if that was a record at the time, but it had to be pretty close.
The word got out on Grease.
Yeah, Grease 2 stinks was the word. It's got neither style nor feel, whatever the lyrics are. I don't remember. Anyway, $2.26 million in 1,250 theaters, $9 million over 10 days. It's dead. Meanwhile, the unkillable Sword and the Sorcerer, once again, kicking the Conan the Barbarian's ass.
Yeah, where's Conan? Not in the top 10.
Earning twice as much in weekend 9 as Conan did in weekend 6.
It's insane.
With
like, what was the
$1.7 million?
What was the best, the strongest fantasy movie in 1982? People were like, Conan the Barbarian. No. I don't care what the final totals are. Sword and the Sorcerer.
Meanwhile, speaking of unkillable, Porky's is still in the top 10 for one last weekend. I assume it's one last weekend. I haven't looked at the next week. Nope, it drops out of the top 10.
Yep, I peeked too. I was like, I have to know.
By the way, are we talking at all about the major re-release that is dropping next weekend? Bambi? 94.7 million after 14 weekends for Porky's. Meanwhile, Hakey Bakey, which is not a Porky spinoff, would earn $1 million in weekend 3, dropping 53%, losing 431 screens for a 776 screen total. That's the Gene Wilder one, right?
Yep.
Which, we talked about how his the attempted comeback film for him and Richard Pryor was Hear No Evil, See No Evil in 1989, also directed by Arthur Hiller. So just throwing that full circle alert in. And in number 12, Conan the Barbarian with $869,000 in 687 screens for a $36.7 million total.
It's kind of interesting that the comedy of the summer is Porky so far, and it was not released in the summer.
Yeah. It's I need to watch Porky's and Sword and the Sorcerer at some point. Because that's a I did not know that until I started doing this podcast.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, like Sword and Sorcerer I thought was some B, one of those
Kroll the Conqueror or whatever.
Not only does it come out before the Conan, and it also does last at the box office way better and longer than Conan's been in for what, maybe a month? Lasted?
I mean, Dragon Slayer came out in 81. That only did 14 million. And that one is, commercially speaking, justifiably forgotten and just another fantasy film that played in that era. I enjoy it just because it's a super young Peter McNichol.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's a film that existed in that time.
I didn't like those movies back then, but I enjoy them now for some reason. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, all right, I like these cheapy fantasy films.
I think there's a certain try-hard nature when they're doing everything by hand.
Yeah, true. True.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
sorry, I'm listening.
No, I was going to say that'll do it for the weekend that was June 18th to 20th. Scott, thanks again, as always, for joining me. This is always so much fun. Looking forward. We're almost to the halfway point. We're edging up there. Before we sign out, let people know where they can keep up with you.
Scott Mendelson at Forbes.com or the ticket booth. You can Google some variation of those 3 words, and that will get you where you need to go.
And boy, that article you dropped this week was a doozy.
Huh?
Oh, we don't know. We don't know when we're recording what you dropped this week. Oh, but you don't want to miss next week. We have one of the biggest film geek weekends of all time as Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford team up for a Philip K. Dick adaptation. John Carpenter and Kurt Russell take a spin on an old classic. Hal Needham and Barry Bostwick go sci-fi. And will Porky's manage to eke out one more week? No, it doesn't. The top 10, it's finished. And who knows, but nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition as we take on the final weekend of June 1982. Stay filmed.
The summer of 82 at 40.
Thank you for listening. The Brandon Peters Show is a Creative Zombie Studios production. Produced by Brad Shoemaker and Brandon Peters. Written and edited by Brandon Peters. Announcer vocals by Jessica Alsman. Theme song by Metavari. Web design and show art by Brad Shoemaker with Brandon Peters. All music and clips featured in the episode are property of their respective studios, and no infringement is intended. The Summer of 82 at 40 and News of the Moment, themes by Press Maxon. Additional information on this and other episodes at thebrandonpetershow.com. For any inquiries, press opportunities, or sponsorship, contact mail@thebrandonpetershow.com. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are found.